and welcome to our program this morning about the dreamed of Trans-Saharan Gas Pipeline, which has been thought about for decades and decades, but has yet to become a reality for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is instability in the region and, in recent years, multiple coups d'etat. We have a very distinguished panel here this morning. We've got the Algerian Ambassador to the United States, Ambassador Sabri Boukadoun, who was also Algeria's Minister of Foreign Affairs and has had a very distinguished career and deep knowledge of this subject. We also have Chargé d'Affaires David Green, who is the Chargé at the U.S. Embassy in Abuja, Nigeria. And chairing our program this morning is Ambassador Charles Ray, who is the chair of our Africa program here at FPRI. And he's also a long-serving Foreign Service officer, formerly ambassador to Zimbabwe and to the Kingdom of Cambodia. And prior to that, he had a full career in the U.S. Army. We'll be doing questions as usual, Q&A. So be thinking of your questions and go ahead and start adding them to the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, ideally the Q&A box. And not the chat, although we'll look in the chat too. We're also going to be sending you a map of the region. It's not quite up yet, but look for that in the chat. That's going to be coming. Finally, I'd like to say thank you, a sincere thank you to our supporters and members, some of whom are on the call this morning. We couldn't do this without your support, and so we are indeed deeply grateful. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the reins over to Charles Ray, Ambassador Ray. And again, about midway, we'll be taking your questions. So start putting them in the Q&A box. Take care.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to echo President Flynn's welcome to all of you for joining us in this very important discussion on the hopefully Trans-Saharan Pipeline, gas pipeline from Nigeria to Algeria. I'm not going to give you detailed descriptions of our panelists today. Their bios were included in the introduction, but needless to say, as our president said, this is a very distinguished panel of people who know the subject and who will be able to, I think, educate all of us as to the significance of this project. I'm going to start with Ambassador Boukadoun, who is Algeria's ambassador to the United States, who will speak for about 2 minutes to introduce the topic, followed by the American Chargé d'Affaires in Abuja, David Green, and a senior fellow of the Foreign Policy Research Institute, Michael Walsh. If each of you gentlemen would make about 2 minutes of introductory remarks, we'll get right into the program. Mr. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you to President Flynn. As you know, the Trans-Saharan Gas Pipe is an important project. I'm sorry. I'm trying to cut short on what I was about to say. I think it's worth to recall that Europe is an energy-hungry economic powerhouse. African countries already contribute to satisfy a great deal of European consumption of fossil energy. More than 18% of its oil consumption in 2021, and a large share of its natural gas consumption for Europe. In 2022, around 33.5 billion cubic meters of GNL only was delivered by 3 African countries, Algeria, Nigeria, and Egypt. Obviously the consequences of the war in Ukraine made the African or the Africa alternative even more important and sought after. Africa can indeed contribute more to the energy security of Europe, but both parties, producers and consumers, must share the risk must invest in more exploration projects, but also in the necessary infrastructure that we are talking about today to deliver this gas, and here manifests the importance of the Trans-Saharan gas pipe, since Nigeria has a huge proven gas reserve, and Algeria has itself, the country, a great potential, but also the necessary infrastructure to and the proximity of the destination market. So let me just tell you, it's still at the, so far at the, it is still a project. We have done a great deal, but what happened in the last year in Niger has made the thinking has influenced the realization of this project, but it's still on the of course on the table. We are still trying in Algeria to have all the three countries discussing. There is, I can assure you, I can also inform you that there will be meetings with the people who are involved in that, the different companies. So Nigeria, Niger, and Algeria in the next few weeks. That's this is a short intervention to just to sum up what was about to say. Thank you, Ambassador. You hear me?
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Mr. Green, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Charlie. Thanks to FPRI and Georgetown for the opportunity, and thanks President Rollins and Ambassador Ray for giving me the chance to speak. As someone who's had the privilege of being a chargé in both Nigeria and Morocco, I've witnessed firsthand the opportunities and complexities inherent in energy cooperation on the continent, and so a conversation like this is really valuable in helping us think creatively and across geographic divides. Just to frame the conversation a little bit, of course, you know, the U.S. strategy for sub-Saharan Africa is the template, the roadmap that we're using, and President Biden has been unequivocal about that the United States is all in on Africa. And as a political force that has shaped our past, is shaping our present, and is going to shape our future. The challenges and opportunities that we're working on with the continent, economic opportunity, climate change, energy security, these aren't, of course, just African or US issues. They're global issues that we need to collaborate together on. We need collective action. So, you know, turning to the subject of today's conversation, Nigeria and Morocco and the proposed infrastructure link between them. Of course, Nigeria being having Africa's largest population, largest economy, largest democracy, it's an essential partner for the United States, and one with which we have a 6-decade, very productive relationship based on common goals of strengthening stability, promoting economic prosperity, and advancing democratic governance. Morocco, which I had the pleasure of calling home for 7 years of my diplomatic career. We have very deep and multifaceted relations with Morocco. It's a major non-NATO ally. It's our only free trade partner on the continent. We have an incredible range of cooperation with it. You know, our joint efforts contribute, we think, to regional security broadly, but also hopefully regional energy security. So when we going back to the administration's strategy towards sub-Saharan Africa, one of its 4 pillars is a focus on conservation, climate adaptation, and a just energy transition. So when we talk about a major infrastructure project like the Nigeria-Morocco Gas Pipeline, you know, we think these kinds of projects and these kinds of efforts are vital in terms of fostering greater integration and cooperation on the continent, and trying to not just allow a country like Nigeria to take advantage of its expansive gas and oil reserves, but also to bring the benefits of energy security across the continent and beyond. You know, of course, when we talk about energy security, in this context, and this has been alluded to, we have to talk about security. And that's, of course, a real challenge for the region. A success of a mega infrastructure project like the proposed Nigeria-Morocco gas pipeline hinges on there being regional stability and security for the development of the infrastructure. The coups and instability in the region underscore the challenges that we face in realizing ambitious projects like this one. And addressing these concerns requires a concerted effort to promote peace, security, and good governance across the region, across the continent. It's not just about military forces or police forces. It's about governance. It's about anti-corruption. It's about accountability on the part of the government. It is about civilian security, and it's about economic opportunity for the communities that these kind of infrastructure projects pass through. The United States, of course, has a very vital role to play in our partnership with the countries of the continent. In Nigeria, which of course is my area of responsibility, U.S. security cooperation over the last 7, 8, 10 years has been mammoth in terms of the dollar figure and in terms of the focus that we've achieved with the Nigerian government in terms of dealing with instability, dealing with the terrorism threat. It's a very strong security partnership. I mentioned transparency, accountability, anti-corruption. We're all very familiar with the challenges in this space, particularly when it comes to energy extraction. In Nigeria, of course, sadly, there's a long history of theft and vandalism of hydrocarbon infrastructure. These are longstanding problems: crude oil theft, illegal connections to pipelines, which then lead to shutdowns of pipeline infrastructure, and these all would negatively affect gas production. So confronting these challenges and overcome them with clear-eyed resolve is a key part of addressing the efforts to increase and make use of energy export from Nigeria. And it's a security issue in the hard security sense, but it's also a broader governance issue that involves cleaning up the web of theft and corruption that surrounds resource extraction in Nigeria. Then we have to consider climate and sustainability. The United States is working very closely to help African partners with uptake of renewables like solar that are projected to outcompete other energy sources on cost continent-wide in the very near future. But we also have a holistic approach. We work very closely with African countries as they determine how best to meet their specific energy needs, understanding that for many Africans, the clean energy transition will be a transition to consistent, reliable energy in the first place. So we have initiatives like Power Africa, which are intended to support the extension of power to individual citizens, and we're doing a lot in Nigeria. In fact, at this very moment, the Nigerian Minister of Energy, I think he was just in Washington, D.C. for a big Power Africa conference. So that's an effort that we're working on. And we know that President Tinubu has been quite clear that Nigeria's hydrocarbon resources are going to play a critical role in terms of powering Nigeria and in terms of export earnings to help bring the economic opportunity that his administration is seeking for the Nigerian people. So this is a reality, and it's something that we're working very closely with Nigeria on as we collectively go through the energy transition. So just to sum up, by embracing the range of principles and issues that I've raised, fostering partnership and engagement between our partners, ensuring regional stability and security, championing transparency and accountability, and promoting a climate-centered approach and sustainable development, we can assist partners like Nigeria and Morocco to navigate the complexities of energy cooperation. And in turn, we hope this will help Africa secure a more sustainable and prosperous future. So thank you. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, David. And now, Michael Walsh, FPRI Senior Fellow. Michael.
Thank you, Ambassador Ray, and thank you to the other ambassadors who presented before me. I'm here because I was asked to speak about my area of expertise, which is really scenario planning and foreign policy and looking at the larger region and how this all might play out. So when you think about sort of the environment in which the Trans-Saharan Pipeline or the Trans-African Pipeline or whatever you want to call it exists within, I think the first environment you need to think about is a transactional environment. And so in this transactional environment, there's been a lot of change since the 1970s when this was first discussed. There's been a lot of change since 2002 when they moved forward with the commercial MOU. There's been a lot of change since 2022 when the government signed their own MOU. So there's been a lot of change in the transactional environment on two sides. On the commercial side, we're seeing a lot of changes. Obviously, we've heard that some of the major international oil companies are going to be exiting the Nigeria market. And so on the onshore side. So that's a major change. So the players are changing on the commercial side. On the government side, we've seen a major change as well. I mean, obviously, we had the Niger coup. and that is one of the three major countries that is playing a part in all of this, for where the pipeline was supposed to be laid. So that's a huge change in the transactional partners. We've seen other countries coming into play. I mean, across the Sahel, we've seen some Middle Eastern countries playing a much more aggressive and interactive role. So these Near Eastern countries, I should say, because Iran is one of them as well, is a new dynamic for the region. So it's the UAEs, the Qatars, the Saudis, the Iran of the world. So they're definitely playing a much more engaged role, from Sudan the whole way across to Mali, and then across North Africa. So I think we're seeing a change in the transactional environment, which is hugely important strategically, for everyone who's involved with this pipeline. But then I think the contextual environment is also shifting quite a lot. And so that's something to take into consideration. So on the commercial side, the LNG market itself has changed. There's now a risk actually of oversupply in some areas. And so we're seeing a maturing of the LNG market. We're seeing shifts in the LNG market. And I think it's a state of flux to some extent. That's what Deloitte has used as their terminology to describe it. So you have the economic market shifting. You have the security environment shifting in the world. And when you're talking about something that is a fixed asset like a pipeline, the security environment in the region matters. And so it also matters on a global level. I mean, we've seen the targeting of critical infrastructure, maritime assets. We've seen submarine cables being targeted. We've seen all types of things being targeted around the world. So these are new risks that have to be managed, or at least they're different risk assessments that have to be managed. So I think that's really important. Those security environments change because of the invasion of Ukraine, because of what's happened with Gaza, because of what's happened in Sudan, because of the situation with the coup in Niger and the other coups across the Sahel. A lot of changes have happened. But I would say for the purpose of why we're here today, I mean, obviously we have the Algerian ambassador to the U.S. and we have the U.S. charge to Nigeria. And so why are we all here talking about it? Because bilateral relations matter a lot too. And U.S. bilateral relations with Algeria, U.S. bilateral relations with Nigeria, with Niger and Morocco are central to all of this as well. And I think that gets back to the bigger thing of we talked a little bit about the U.S. strategy towards sub-Saharan Africa. I have a position on African studies at one U.S. university. I have one on the Middle Eastern studies at another U.S. university. In the strategy, they talk about the artificial bureaucratic divide between North Africa and sub-Saharan Africa. That is something that has, been referred to as the line in the sand that was drawn. It has neocolonial and Orientalist undertakings. And I think the U.S. is finally recognizing as a country that these artificial bureaucratic divides limit the potential of U.S. foreign policy. And I think that the Biden administration is finally addressing that issue head on. And I think that the Trans-Saharan Pipeline and the Moroccan pipeline and all of the other things we're talking about, they really reinforce what we talked about in the prior webinar with the U.S. Ambassador Chad about diagonal alignment and the need to look beyond your country, its neighbors, and the region when you're developing U.S. foreign policy at the country level. And I think that, we just had a very nice reference to that by Mr. Green. And I think that this is something that at the individual embassy level, it's recognized around the world for the U.S. that this has to start happening. We have to start having greater coordination and alignment between our embassies in different regions of the world. And I think other countries are also coming to that same conclusion. And I think when you're talking about something like this, with a pipeline that's going to extend across multiple regions, it's going to impact Europe, it's going to impact North Africa, it's going to impact West Africa. And it's in this contextual environment with global major power competition and everything else, you can't help but to put it in that proper context.
Okay, thank you all three of you for outstanding presentations. I have a question though that veers a little from what we've talked about. We mentioned Russia, and of course, Europe has been prior to the invasion of Ukraine, Europe was quite dependent upon Russia for certain fuel energy supplies. And this pipeline, when it comes into being, will affect that European dependence on Russia. And of course, we know that Russia is quite present in the Sahel in the form primarily of the Wagner Group. And so my question is, what consideration is being given to a possible Russian reaction to this project? Let's start with you, David. You're closer to the problem in Nigeria.
Sure. No, it's an interesting question. I mean, I think the reality is, I mean, I can't speak with such in depth about the actual sort of infrastructure construction, but these are both very long-term projects, or certainly the coastal pipeline would be. You know, your dates to completion are, you know, decades potentially. And so, you know, it's hard to know exactly what the energy mix is going to look like in Europe in say 10 years. I'm not an energy guy myself, but obviously did a little research before today's discussion. And my understanding is the share of Russian pipeline gas in EU imports has dropped from over 40% in 2021 to about 8% in 2023. So, you know, these kinds of dramatic swings are possible on a fairly short-term basis. So it's a little bit hard to look that far out and say exactly how is this going to contribute to the mix, and therefore the sort of geostrategy of Europe, of Europe's energy demand, you know, in the time frame in which these would be built. So you know, I think it's clear that both the Moroccan and the Nigerians are determined to go ahead. The the Nigerian Minister of State of the Ministry of Petroleum was in Rabat just a few weeks ago to try and accelerate construction of this pipeline. And I think you know, the complexity of the energy transition, Nigeria's extraction of its resources and export of them, and the European energy mix make it very hard to sort of project out how this is going to look in the medium and long term.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Ambassador, you have anything you'd like to add to that?
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm trying to cope with the technology. So no, but well, I'm sorry. I thank Mr. Walsh for his really. I really appreciate the way he presented the things now. My understanding is that we are about to today. The webinar is on the pipe from Nigeria to Algeria and then to Europe. But if you talk strategy, yes, I'm okay with that. I mean, when we talk strategy, we talk about the future. It's not only objectives, it's how we see the future. That's the basics to me for strategy. So and you mentioned something, Mr. Walsh, it's very important, is that we have to be very careful, and we do in Algeria. I myself do personally engage and embarked upon this, that not to cut or to find a gap between North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa. It's very important. And these kind of projects are very important for the future, to maintain the cohesion of African states and African continent. It's even good for everyone, including for the United States. I mean, the difference today is that you mentioned for as a matter of strategy, the situation in Ukraine, of course, that it has changed all the data for Europe, mainly for Europe, not for the United States, because now the United States, the new strategical importance of the United States as a major exporter of energy, which was not the case a few years ago. So that changed the balance in the whole world. It changed even for strategical interest, not only on the economy, on oil and gas, but for the importance of other countries, including the Middle East and Africa. So it's basically for the today for Africa. We also working. We are working on a transition on renewable, of course. Don't forget for Algeria, if we mention just Algeria, we have 2 million square kilometers of Sahara, where we have 330 days of sunny days, I would say. So there is a huge potential. There is a huge potential for the. So we are going also for transition, for the transition. But today we need to work on that. For the two projects, I understand that what Ambassador Green has said. The two projects are here. Which one would be commercially efficient? I don't know. But the fact that what we have already done between Algeria, Niger, and Nigeria already exists. It's almost, I would say, about 50% of the pipe is already done, mainly in Nigeria and in Algeria. So you mentioned the situation, of course, of what happened. I would add also that situation in Libya that has impacted on Niger and others. You mentioned the situation in Sudan, in Mali, all the coup that happened in all this area that are even complicate the things or make them more complex. But the need, the demand for energy, the hungry driven for gas in Europe, especially now. So we need to work together. So that's what there's no competition. There's no competition when there's this demand. The exception of the United States, but there's no competition. I can tell you from my country, there's many Europeans, especially those who are our immediate neighborhood, the Mediterraneans especially, they're looking for this gas, for the energy sources. That's what I wanted to say, just to make it clear. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Ambassador Ray.
Thank you. Before I throw my next question out, Michael, would you want to add to that, in particular, what the Russian influence might be on this project, even though it is long term?
Well, from a geostrategic perspective, I mean, any Russian presence in Niger, is a influential factor in the future of this pipeline, and it gives leverage to Russia. So Russia pulling into Niger physically, if you just look at the map, the pipeline's got to go through it. So regardless of what's happening on either side, what's happening in the middle matters. So if that gives leverage to Russia. But I think the bigger issue, and I think this webinar is helping to shine some light on it. We're talking about the Trans-Saharan pipeline, but we're also talking about the Morocco pipeline, at the same time. So the 3 BCF D pipeline, there's a historical issue there that's longstanding between Morocco and Algeria. And I think from a U.S. perspective, the future of the Western Sahara is increasingly going to be determined by two major countries in Africa. It's going to be Algeria and Morocco. And you see Morocco trying to push into Mali and to Mauritania and some other places and get a foothold there. Algeria clearly has to play a big role in Niger. I think we talked a lot about Nigeria and ECOWAS, and ECOWAS is changing. But I think when we're talking about the future of Western Sahara, we see in real terms, just since the Niger coup, that Algeria matters, Morocco matters in the future. And so that competition that has always existed between Morocco and Algeria matters. And if you're Russia, what you're going to try to do is drive a wedge between that, because that's to your advantage. And what the U.S. needs to do is to prevent that wedge, because Algeria wants to work with the U.S., Morocco wants to work with the U.S. The U.S. has to walk this fine line between the two and figure out a way to work with both constructively and have positive relations with both. And I think that when we're talking about the pipeline, because there's two pipelines and there's two competitors and everything else, it complicates things. So the U.S. is going to have to figure out a way to work that, and Russia is going to try to exploit that to their advantage.
Okay, thank you. One more question. And this probably would be best going to you, David, since you're on the ground there. What is the forecast local economic impact of this project in terms of the impact it has on the average Nigerian?
Oh, wow. That's a complicated question. If I could just mention something about just quickly in response to something that Michael just said, and I take his point. And I think one of the great things about the subjects we're talking about is that Algeria, Morocco, Nigeria, all partners of the United States. So mean, we're not ourselves, I think, invested in these infrastructure projects, or at least we haven't gotten to that point, at least as far as the coastal one, which I track more carefully. But we are partners with all three of these countries. We are seeking to, sustain the partnership with Niger that we had established before last July's coup. And so I think, our goal is to certainly to do everything that we can to help achieve the kind of regional stability and economic prosperity that these pipelines both require and would contribute to, not to mention sort of global economic security. So I think the relationships that we have that are very constructive and very positive with all three of the principal countries that we're talking about in this context are very important and pretty successful. So to go back to your question, Charlie, I think what I would say is that, first of all, there are not so many people employed in the hydrocarbon industry in Nigeria as maybe there once were. And in fact, in these days, hydrocarbons and resource extraction of that nature only contribute less than 10% to overall Nigerian GDP. The tech sector, for example, is more than double that. So the Nigerian economy is really one that is very rapidly running ahead to a service economy, and obviously agriculture is a huge employer, but tech and fintech are leading lights in terms of where the Nigerian economy is going in the future. And these are all areas in which we're also partnering with Nigeria and investing in Nigeria. That said, hydrocarbons and the export of crude remains Nigeria's biggest dollar earner. So when it comes to hard currency, the export of energy is really vital to what Nigeria needs to have a healthy, thriving economy. So I think in that sense, even if it doesn't have a day-to-day impact on a vast scale of employment or income, it is very critical to the health of the overall Nigerian economy. That said, when you look at what's the second largest export earner for dollars in Nigeria, it's cocoa. So, the immense potential that Nigeria has economically does allow for you to envision a future of significant diversification of its economy more broadly, and also of its hard currency earnings.
Okay, thank you. Very, very interesting. We could go on because I have many more questions, but I think it's only fair that we give our audience a chance to have their questions answered. So I'm now going to turn it over to President Flynn, who will moderate the questions from our audience.
Thank you very much. And we have a lot of questions from our audience. And the first one, according to your analysis, to what extent do you think French uranium mining has stimulated unrest and instability in the Malian and Nigerian Sahel? And why don't I toss that to Chargé Green?
Well, I have to say that is well beyond my area of expertise and my area of responsibility. So I would have to punt on that. But what I will say is that instability in the Sahel, the recent spate of coups, the threat to democracy, the continuing expansion of terrorist activity that this sort of challenges in governance have created. These are all of great concern to the United States. And one of the principles that President Biden articulated in the connection to the African Leaders Summit a year and a half ago is that democracy needs to deliver for its people, and the countries of the region need to deliver. So as part of our effort is to try and work with ECOWAS, work with the regional states, engage with the coup states to try and find a path that brings them back onto the road to democracy in a way that also then will help better address the needs and aspirations of their people. So that's really what we're focused on, is how do we move from the situation we're in right now to getting things back on track and building the kind of regional cohesion and integration and governance that the region so desperately needs.
Thank you. Ambassador Boukadoun or Michael, do you have anything to add to that?
I can interject one thing. I mean, I just got back from France, and obviously there's a lot of discussion about the French nuclear industry and where France wants to go. Building reactors in Poland and all types of other things that they've been discussing. So when you look at the consumption of uranium globally for nuclear power, and it's part of this green energy transition. I mean, nuclear is coming back into the mix, and there's a lot of countries that have an interest in having nuclear reactors that didn't 5 years ago. And so I think we're looking at a change in the consumption and the demand for uranium. So that has a factor just on the economic side, but it's a strategic resource. And so when we're talking about a world of major power competition, having control over strategic resources, whether they're rare earth metals or they're LNG or they're uranium, is part of the game that everyone's playing. And so I think when it comes to uranium, one of the good things is there's a lot of undiscovered uranium out there. So there will be additional areas of supply. But it plays a factor in what's happening, but I wouldn't say it's the driving factor of what's happening in either Mali or Niger.
Thank you. Any other comments on that?
Yes, definitely was, as Walsh mentioned, that there is a lot of uranium there. It's not seen, including in my country, which especially in this area of the southern part of Algeria, the desert. You mentioned other countries' interest in the area. There's many more, and there's even pipes that are they're about to be in functioning now this year. Maybe they already started from Niger to the southern part of. Let me just mention Cotonou in Benin. So nobody mentioned, and even when you mentioned ECOWAS, when there were the sanction against Niger, with the exception of this pipe, so, which was a little curious, I would say. So there are many other. Talking especially to Mr. Green, the U.S. charge in Abuja. So there are many others that are interested in Africa because we went beyond the pipe, the Algerian pipe. We went beyond that. So there are many other actors now, or would-be actors in Africa, in this part of Africa. So there is this global picture that you have to take into account. So please have a closer look on that. And I would like to make just a small. There is no competition because I understood, or maybe I misunderstood also. I understood there's no competition between what is called the Moroccan pipe and the Algerian pipe. If in those who are investing or about to invest in these pipes, the two pipes, so be it. If they think they'll find interest, there's no competition. We're not going into a war because of that. We think the pipe between Lagos and Algiers is more efficient, I mean, economically. Now, if you think it will help for the other one, so be it, no problem. You have. I wonder if you see the geography, you have to cross so many countries with almost the same problems. We have one problem now with Niger, but you have many other problems. You have to cross. Let's say just quickly: Benin, Togo, Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, Sierra Leone, Liberia, Guinea, Senegal, Mauritania, Western Sahara. Go ahead. It's if it's okay for you, for those who want to invest. So there is no competition. I'm very happy to hear there's about the United States. It's in their end. It's in our interest, in the interest of the United States, interest of everyone to have the peace there, the dialogue, peace, the discussion, and not being moved by some kind of competitive on the issues you mentioned. So as far as my country is concerned, we invested a lot in Africa, and we invested a lot because of what Mr. Walsh has mentioned at the beginning, that we need to have the whole world. It's not, and all the other values that you mentioned, Ambassador Green, about how can we get to the population? Can we improve the situation of the population? How can we improve them? Thank you, President.
Another question on carbon reduction. Is part of the strategic focus of the hydrogen pipeline to further African carbon reduction as well as in Europe? Who would like to take that?
I can speak about it if you want.
Thank you.
I can go ahead. So, speaking about my country, not others, and Africa. You know, I think there is all the negotiations that happen in the reduction and the different COPs and speaking about in the Africans feel that we are imposed upon responsibilities that are not ours. Regarding, so I mean, we fully understand, of course, the need to go to transition. It's unjustified and unjust. We are not the biggest polluters, absolutely not. We people or countries whose economy is still based on, or mainly based on fossil energy resources. We are going, we're trying to go, and working with the United States, by the way, in this area for the different pledges on carbon reduction, methane reduction, and the COPs, of course. So we're doing it, but please have a look at. So, but let me speak about Algeria. We have a huge plan for transition from going through have this objective for the 2030 that we're working on it. We transitioning on a renewable. So please have a different look for Africa and for the rest of the world. We don't. By the way, we don't have the biggest industries that are polluting the atmosphere or even our atmosphere. So you have to, what we call it, differentiate. I know the sentence that not well liked in some countries, including here in Washington, differentiated responsibilities, common but differentiated responsibilities. This is very important. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. We have a question. Over the past 30 minutes or so, we have heard remarkably little about the posture of the EU, nor have we heard anything about the level of commitment from key EU members. Does the EU and its membership have any remaining commitment to the project? And then it goes on, what does the EU need to be doing specifically to move the ball forward? Michael, do you want to take that one?
Well, I can say anecdotally, I mean, from talking to people when I was traveling in Europe about it, I mean, it's not something that's top on mind of many of the people I talk to. So when they're talking about energy security, they're definitely talking about LNG supply, and they're talking about diversification, and they're talking about all these issues. But I think one of the interesting things when it comes to the pipelines coming out of North Africa for the European Union generally is that, you know, you have Italy and France, which are large consumers, and then you have Spain obviously playing a role in all of this as well. And you have different pipelines that go to different places. And historically, there's been some interruptions to the supply for political reasons, and there's been a lot of things that have happened. And so you do, I mean, potentially have daylight between some of the EU member states on what the optimal policy is when it comes to any discussions about pipelines coming out of North Africa into Europe. And so that's one thing, going back to the Russia question about things that other actors want to exploit. You know, I think that's a potential to try to drive a wedge between that daylight between EU member states. When it comes to the specific question of what the EU is doing and all of that, again, I think what Mr. Green said, it's out of my wheelhouse, so I'm not going to try to dive into that too much. But I will say that, you know, I think there's a recognition within Europe on the security side that the Morocco pipeline, for the reasons that that Ambassador Boukadoun provided is a risky project. And I think any project right now is risky when you have to go through conflict areas. And Niger is a conflict area. We have coups that have happened along that pipeline. Western Sahara is an unsettled question. So I think that there's a perception that these are risky projects, and they're not going to fix the energy problem with Russia today that Europe has been very transfixed on. These are long-term projects. And so I think the one thing that I will end with is that, you know, Europe is very interested in its relationship with Algeria for current supplies, and the important role that Algeria is playing in diversifying the energy supplies for Europe today. And I think that the one thing Europe doesn't want to do is to impact any of that and the progress they've made there in the short term, when you've got the conflict going on in Ukraine and you've got other global instability issues.
Thank you. Charche Green, anything to add to that?
Well, thank you. I guess the only thing I'd note is that my understanding is, you know, when it comes to the coastal pipeline, the one via Morocco, that the Moroccans are certainly advocating for European governments to support funding it, because the Europeans would benefit from enhanced security, energy security through it. So, of course, the economic case for a pipeline of this magnitude, and as I take, you know, the Ambassador Boukadoun's point, you know, it's very involved, it's very long, it's very expensive. It has to go through a dozen or more countries, you know, territorial waters, presumably. Requires the kind of you know, a lot of financing, and the long-term stability to make it realistic. So these are all parts of the challenges. I'll also note, you know, a concern that we, and I think many have when we think about the climate transition, is a risk of stranded assets. You know, you invest a lot of money in the facilities to produce and transport hydrocarbons as the global economy is turning away from hydrocarbons towards renewables. So you do have to take that into consideration as well. So the United States is certainly monitoring very, very closely the developments, and again, as part of the broader efforts to achieve regional integration, economic growth, prosperity, and energy security. Both these pipelines are very important in that broader constellation of work, and something that we're paying very close attention to.
Thank you. Question, can you clarify for this admitted newcomer to the project, A, who owns the gas in the upstream fields or fields, and B, how much of the gas is available for throughput? Who would like to answer that? Some specifics.
Well, I'm not an expert in terms of the ownership structure, but you know, in Nigeria, the extraction of oil and gas is usually worked out through joint ventures with international oil companies and all that. So I think that, in a sense, the ownership is the Nigerian states, but beyond that, it's subject to whatever specific agreement is worked out. When looking at the coastal pipeline, I think the number that I see knocked around is that Nigeria has 200 trillion cubic feet of proven reserves of gas, and that's certainly you know, part of what is driving the idea that a gas pipeline would be important, both for Nigeria and for the other countries along the region, which presumably would offtake as well, and for Europe.
To a layperson like me, that sounds like a lot. How does that compare to other major fields, oil fields?
I would have to defer to other experts on that. I'm not an oil and gas guy. I just know some of the statistics in the Nigeria context.
Okay, thank you. Let's move to another. Let's see. 1 week ago, there was a 7th Gas Exporters Countries Forum in Algiers, which summed up in Algiers' declaration. My questions are, why did the USA not attend? And what do your invitees think of the declaration? Thank you. I guess, Charche Green, do you know why the US did not attend?
Sorry, I lost the window. What was the question again?
It was 1 week ago, there was a 7th Gas Exporters Countries Forum in Algiers, which summed up in Algiers' declaration. My question is, why did the US not attend? And what do your invitees and our guests today think of the declaration that was made? Thank you.
I can't tell you why I don't know that the United States didn't attend. I can't tell you why. I do know that we are very active participants in just about every forum that exists when it comes to discussing energy security, when it comes to discussing the energy transition and climate issues and hydrocarbon contribution to that. So I think we're, contribute very robustly to the global debate on this issue. With regard to that specific forum, I couldn't speak to that.
Yeah, perhaps Ambassador, would you like to comment on that summit and the declaration?
Yes, no, a quick answer first for the United States, because they're not members of this group, but the United States attended through, I think, some ceremonies there with the ambassador in Algeria. That's for sure. So I'd say the most important thing is that the conclusions of the declaration is that we have to find a balance between the gas producers and consumers. We renewed I would say the vow to make sure that the security of the delivery of natural gas will continue. It's a mutual interest for everyone. So you have to see it as a positive, a confirmation of a positive attitude towards the consumers. So why the US was not, because they were not part simply of this forum. I don't know what are the rules exactly, but I don't see why they shouldn't be there. Okay, thank you.
And I can add one thing about the declaration itself, because I imagine the impetus for this is the reporting that's been coming out about the fact that the declaration and the discussions at the event focused on sanctions. And there's a discussion about how you need UN Security Council support to take any unilateral economic sanction action against countries. And so that was a big issue. And you saw the Chinese newspapers even, putting stories out about it, because again, that's another issue to drive a wedge between the United States and the West and other countries around the world, because there's a lot of strong sentiments about sanctions, about, is this a good idea for the US and Europe to be doing? And so that event did play a role in that. And I think you're seeing an attempt to politicize that issue by the Chinese and by some other major power competitors of the United States.
Thank you. We're coming close to the end. We have a question I think that is really very important, and it's by an anonymous attendee. It says, will this pipeline help Africans to increase their access to energy? There have been a lot of projects designed to increase the availability of energy throughout Africa. What impact do you see this pipeline having on domestic markets in Nigeria or Algeria? Ambassador, would you like to answer that? Not sure if you heard. Chargé Green, why don't we throw that to you while we're waiting?
Sure. Well, I think the issue for Nigeria is not necessarily supply of oil or gas to Nigerians. It's refining capacity, its distribution capacity, and its access to the electrical grid, for example. So Nigeria is certainly suffering from some very real energy poverty, but it's not about lack of access to hydrocarbons. I do think, again, I'll leave it to Ambassador Boukadoun to speak about the Trans-Saharan Pipeline. But with regard to the idea of the coastal pipeline, that would certainly be a path by which to offer Nigeria's gas resources to the littoral countries all along west coast and northwest coast of the continent, because the pipeline would run along their coastlines, and they could offtake according to agreements that they would reach with the consortium that's behind it. So in that sense, I think what we as the United States are focused on in Nigeria is the broader mix of energy. How do we support development of hydropower? How are we advancing solar? How are we advancing wind and renewables? We're doing a lot in that space through Power Africa, through other tools that we have to try and alleviate and address the need of Nigerian citizens to have sustained power for both, their individual livelihoods, but also for the economic growth that Nigeria needs.
Michael or Ambassador Boukadoun, anything to add to that?
I mean, if you
Well,
look at the pathway of the pipeline, I think one of the most interesting things is you've got this on the Human Development Index, this huge range. Niger is at the bottom. Nigeria is pretty low relative to, I think, what a lot of people would expect it to be. And Algeria is much higher. And so when you look at sort of where Algeria is development-wise and the life of an average Algerian versus the life of an average person in Niger, and many people in Nigeria, there's more disposable income, there's more opportunity to talk about energy security, because in a place like Niger right now, we're talking about much deeper levels of security than energy security. We're talking about surviving day to day. And so it's a different sort of calculation. And so I think where this really comes in is, how can the energy that's being throughput through the pipeline or the taxes or other revenues being generated from it improve security for Africans. And so I don't think it's just about energy security. It's broader than that. But I think if you look at the three countries and you're talking about energy security, actually Algeria, they have energy security themselves domestically, but they're actually in the driver's seat. They have the most development when it comes to this. And so they're the ones who'd be the most to benefit from that, I would say, in terms of energy security, because the other places are much lower on the security index.
We have one more minute. Ambassador Boukadoun, would you like to have the last word?
Yes, a quick word on this right issue. I cannot speak about other countries, Nigeria or Niger. Niger, obviously, there is many things to do for development. But speaking about Algeria, about the impact of the pipe today, very frankly, it will be for Europe too. But today, for Algeria, with our resources, it's 98% of all households who got the electricity, mainly through gas, for the gas turbines, production of electricity, and 60%, between 60 and 65% of all households they're linked to the natural gas grid today, as I speak. So the impact is already there. So maybe it will be an experience for others, Nigeria and Niger. There's of course there's a lot, many things to do. But definitely there will be connections. If we had this pipe, it will help tremendously Niger with their power hungry for all the needs for Niger. That's what I wanted to say about this issue. Thank you.
Thank you. And before I close, I'll say that we have a comment from Ambassador Hank Cohen, who is a friend to many of you, I'm sure, who says 200 TCUF of gas in Nigeria is greater than all the rest of Africa combined. Enormous. So just in terms of the amount. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Ambassador Boukadoun. Thank you, Chargé Green. Thank you, Michael Walsh. And of course, our chair, Ambassador Ray. Thank you for being here today. We will be posting this on FPRI's YouTube channel. Please tune into that and others, and come visit us on www.fpri.org, where we have lots of articles and reports, not only on Africa, but on the rest of the world. Thank you so much for joining us today.